Right. So what are we going to talk about? I guess, so class-based views. So like you, Martin, um, I learnt with functional views. Django didn't have a class-based views when I learned it. So I, for years, used functional views because it just made more sense. Some students do end up finding functional views, and for some students, it makes more sense to go that way. What you what I guess the difficulty for class-based views is they do a lot of the work for you, and a lot of it's using magic words. And so to decipher what all these magic words are, like what I was using to figure out how, like in this particular case, we were debugging index view. So index view has this get query set function, which is used quite often in class-based views to define how a query set should work. This get query set from list view, all it does is basically do this job. So this entire thing is superfluous because it could just be model equals news story. That would do all of this. So you wouldn't have to define that there because you've defined this, and get query set by default does model objects all. So there's no point to needing that. However, if you are going to put something on there like a order by, pub date, I think is what it's called. That is where you would put it. And where I was using that class-based views site, CCBV, classy class-based views, this one,
Yes.
was to just define what's going on. So we go to generic list view, generic list view, generic list view. So this will give us all of the attributes. It also gives us all of the methods. So you can view them like as view is the one that gets called. This is everything that it does. It's going to do a bunch of stuff.
Okay.
Most of that is just boilerplate. Not a lot of that actually has much of value. Oh, there's some new async stuff in there. View class. Anyway, so what it's going to do is it's going to call get, because get is the thing that we're doing first. So it's going to go, cool, our object list is self.getQuerySet. So it gets the object list by running this getQuerySet. Allow empty, it goes to check a function to see if it's allowed to be empty. If not allowed empty, then do some validation. Then the context is get context data. So it's going to call this function, this method. I'm calling the functions, the methods, and then return rendered a response context. So that's what get's going to do. So we can use this site to go, cool, that's what get's doing. So we need to look at get context data to determine some stuff. So get context data, multiple object mix in. So this is going to go query set. So object list, if object list is not none, else self object list. So if it gets past an object list, it's going to use that. Otherwise, it's going to use the one that's already been like populated as part of the class. Page size, just a generic default that's doing some stuff based on pagination. Like context object name is using this get context object name. So basically most of these attributes that are up here, like context name, model, like these will be how you define the default. And then you've got these sorts of gets, like get context object name, which is a way you can add a function to do it if you need one. So same as I was saying in here, you didn't really need to have get query set if you had model equals news story, right? Like if model news story was there, you wouldn't need return news story in here, because this thing here would by default call that. So it's only when you need to override that functionality. And from doing this, we end up learning, you can learn a bunch of stuff. So I was particularly looking for what the context is getting sent, what the query set is getting sent as. So it's getting sent as object list. If you return a single object, so a single object mix-in, it's just object. If it's a multiple object mix-in, it's object list. So in this particular case, we've got model news story. We've got this template name. Template name, again, doesn't need to be there. This get query set doesn't need to be there. This get context data doesn't need to be there. So pretty much everything in this list view is superfluous except that one field. If I was to run this again, it's going to have all sorts of dramas, but let's give it a go. Run server. Cool. I can't see because this web zooms in the way. Let me just.
Oh, yeah.
News. All right, it's going to say news story list doesn't exist. So where this is what by default the class-based view is looking for a template name, because we've taken the template name out. So by default, it looks at news story and it goes, all right, so you're after a news story. That's the thing you're looking for and you want to create a list of it. So therefore, I'm going to look for a news story list. So we can just go in here, create a new news.
It's a way of exploring it as well.
Yeah.
You just make it crash and see which one is the file name that it's asking for.
Yep. I'm just going to copy and paste everything from index in here. But what I need to do is change later stories to object list. Actually, I should have just how do I replace all? Later stories, object list, replace all. Boom. All right, cool. For story in object list, that theoretically would work, and it does. So we've taken a view that had all of those lines and replaced it with one line, because all this needs to know is that we're listing news stories. That's it. When it comes to this part of needing to order by, I don't know if there is an order. Oh, is there? Oh. Minus update. Pub underscore date, isn't it? Yeah, and that's replaced it. So really, there you go. That's it. Two things. We can just do it that way. We don't need to do a custom query set because there's an ordering in there already. You could take those out, replace them with this, and run that again. And it'll do the exact same thing because that's just overriding these two missing. So that's part of where class-based views kick in. The other interesting factor for this would be with the user view for creating for the user profile. So class is going to be user profile view, and this is going to be a generic detail view. The model is going to be custom user. Now, normally in basically everywhere else, I would be using the, I would have something like user equals get user model and calling it that way, just as a constant. But because this is already imported the user from its local model, there's no point of doing that. But if you're seeing students needing to talk to, you're needing to get that somewhere else, like in the news section, then change it that way, if that makes sense. So, sorry, I'm
okay.
So user profile view, model, custom user, cool. URLs, I'll go here. I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to say path. I'm going to go profile, and then I'm going to have int pk, because that's the default standard that it's looking for an integer. And I'm going to say, oh, we have to import this one because it's being done this way. Now, normally I would have from dot import views. So you can just go views dot for each of these. You don't have to import them one by one.
Yeah.
But that's not how this was done. So user profile. Then my autocomplete would have been happy as view. And then name equals profile. Cool. All right. So I've done that. I've done this. Let's go over here. I go users profile 1, and it's going to come up user detail, custom user detail. Again, makes sense, right? Custom user detail. So in here, templates, users, custom user detail.html. And that's because it's a detail view, so it's looking for a detail, right? I'm just going to grab, what am I going to grab? Story, create account. No, well, I'll grab this, but.
Is it looking for details of the user? Is that what that page should be?
Yeah, so it's the user's profile. So user profile is going to be, so let's just throw some stuff in here. So again, because we haven't defined a context, return context item name, whatever that field's called, it's going to be referring to it as object, because it's a single object username. And we could, in our view here, go context object name equals user, just to make it more reasonable. And then in here, we would have user.username, which would probably make more sense. It's not essential. Maybe I'll leave this one in here just for the sake of making it more sense, right? Username, user.email. I don't even think that's in there. Right. So username.
Definitely helps.
Reload. Cool. Me. There we go. But maybe I should make that a H2 or something, just to make it a bit more obvious. Cool. All right. I've got a user now. I can then go user 2. Cool. I've got 2 users. So this is making sense so far?
Yes.
Cool. So the next thing I would probably look at is in here. One of the other things that we haven't really gone over, and it's one of the things I would have liked to have gone over if I was in class, is like the reverse lookups of foreign keys. So you'll have to forgive me, COVID's stolen a lot of my words, but I can't remember what the term is for what I'm trying to suggest, but anyway, there's a technical term for it, but I'm going to call it a reverse lookup because I can't remember what it is. So what you can do is we can use for story in user.news story set.all, which should give us all the stories that this user is the author of. I'm just going to do an N for, and then I'm going to copy and paste some stuff from one of the other templates because it's easier. This is all I need. Actually, this one's what I need. Why is my shift not working? Who knows? Right. Now, if I was to reload this now, hopefully, yeah.
We imported.
News story card. There you go. So it's now loaded. We've got story. Cool. I'm happy with that. We could probably make it even better by stealing that style sheet that lives here. Sticking that up there somewhere. Oof. Oh yeah, static news. Oh, should work. Why is that? Oh, load static. There we go. That doesn't make it look any better. Anyway, I'll get rid of that. So that makes sense. Like doing that.
Yeah.
Like being so rather than so what'll happen quite often is the students will create a view in here that'll be like, all right, cool. So give me a user, then I'm going to look up things. So they'll create like a class author view or author list view, and it'll be a generic list view, probably very similar to the first one, and they'll try and do like a def get query set, and they'll do some sort of like query set equals what's the thing, use story dot objects dot filter author equals self dot requests dot user, something like that. So they'll try and look up the news stories given a filter rather than get the user and look up the user's stories from the user object, because they're not aware that that's something they can do. They know if they can get the user from the news story, they don't know they can get the news story from the user. They don't know they can go backwards. What I tend to like doing in my Django world is I tend to like going, I tend to like having what's it called? There's like a I really can't remember, sorry. There's a field in here on the foreign key that you can set, which will when you do one of these lookups, it determines what the field's going to be called. So rather than be called news story underscore set, you could have like users dot stories or users dot publish stories or something like that. It makes it a little bit more human readable, but yeah, it's not that big a deal. Related name, that's what it's called. So like related name is so this would be what the field on the user's model will be to look up the stories. And so you could be like written, or
related name is giving it another name that you want to call it.
Related name is how it relates back. So this is the relationship.
Okay.
So class, so author to stories is so there's, it's a foreign key. So it's a many to one in one direction and one to many in the other. So from the author, now I've got related name. I would have to update this customer detail, and this would be, what did I call it? Authored stories. It's terrible. I would never use that in real life. Authored stories.all. Reload, still works. So yeah, it's just basically going, so from my user, I can now look at authored stories to get all of the stories that this person has authored. That makes sense.
Tomorrow, are they just doing, is it sort of a free-for-all and they can just, have they got a list of things that they're trying to accomplish, or is it just expanded however you will?
There's definitely a list. The list is part of their project. So their project has definite defined goals. Yeah, I'll go through that later when we stop recording.
Cool.
Any more questions on class-based views?
I think that was good. Thank you a lot. I don't know if you want to add anything else. Happy to listen, but I don't have any specifics.
Template views are a really good one. Regular, detail view, create, delete, form, update. I haven't used any of these date-based ones before. The template view, you could actually just call directly from your URL. So say you had just something that was a template that didn't need any like, you know, like a page that was like an about page or something, you know, you'd have like a path dot, you know, contact page, and you could just, instead of having that, you would go like generic dot template view as view template name, or something like, I think it's template name equals my contact.html, which is a pretty simple way to just completely skip needing to actually you know, create a view at all, because you're just doing it inline. Yeah, I actually got it right, I think, too. Look at that. So yeah, and then like contact will be looking for contact.html. So, you know, I'll go back here.
That's cool.
I go, the other thing I was going to say is, so my profile view, right? Profile view. The other thing I'd talk about is in here, you have got the ability to create a, to do this with a slug rather than with a, trying to remember what it is. Slug. I think if I call it slug, let's just try and suss this out. Profile. I think you might need to give it a different name. I'm not sure about this double naming. If you could double name them and overload it with different parameters. Anyway, it might work, it might not. But anyway, so we're using the same user view. We're going to pass it a username instead. So our slug field is going to be our unique field, which is username. And let's just see if I can get it to work with doing that. So let's change this to Bendog. And it works. So there we go. So by using this magic word slug, it knows that instead of a primary key, this slug is going to be a string-based identifier, or some form of identifier that's not a primary key. We're using a string. And then when we go to user profile, we've gone, all right, slug field is username. So it knows that when it's looking for the object, if it gets a slug, then it has to look up the username equals that slug. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
Slug is a news term if you haven't heard it before. It's because Django originated as a newspaper website, so it's the unique identifying like headline, or that, like the you know, like in WordPress, where WordPress will give you a URL based on the title that you put in. That's your slug. It's the thing that they'll use for like a human readable reference. Cool. Any more questions, or I will stop recording?
That's it. Thank you a lot, at least from my side.
I'm good.
All right. How do I stop recording?